It's T-minus 4 days until Alireza Firouzja is back in action playing classical chess. So he's playing in Bucharest, Romania. This is the first leg of the Grand Chess Tour and it starts with round 1 on the 5th of May. So he's playing tons of top players, including Jan Nepomniachtchi, and I'm looking back at the last classical game that these two guys played, which was Norway Chess 2021. So let's see what happened here. Alireza had white and he kicked off with pawn to e4. e5 from Nepo, knight f3, knight c6, and now Alireza went bishop c4, the Italian game. Knight to f6, pawn d3, the bishop came to c5, and now pawn c3, preparing d4 later, sometimes b4, d6 from Nepo, both players castled, and now the rook came to e1, a very useful move. When d4 is played, it protects this pawn, sometimes the e-file opens. Pawn a5 from Nepo gives that bishop some retreat space, also clamps on the queen side. Pawn h3 from Alireza takes away g4. The bishop dropped back now, and pawn to a4. Alireza does likewise, and sometimes that light squared bishop tucks back to b3 into c2. Many different subtle maneuvers for the super GMs in these positions, and that's why they love them. So pawn h6 from Nepo. This knight came to d2, and now bishop e6 challenges that dangerous diagonal, a very standard idea. Now sometimes this bishop comes to b5, keeps pieces on the board, keeps tension, but Alireza actually takes in this game. The pawn recaptures, and now he drops this knight in on c4. And we can see when the knight lands there that both of the knights are pressuring e5, and it's actually preventing black from playing d5 here. So knight h5 now from Nepo, very standard idea. Bishop e3, those ones got exchanged, the rook recaptured, the knight hit f4, and now this moment's quite interesting for me. So Alireza played a suboptimal move. You know, the main idea here when you run this with the engines is just king h2, prophylaxis, protecting h3, preparing g3 here. But what Alireza did was drop this knight back into d2. And it's not the best move, like said, but it kind of mixes up the position. You know, if Nepo wanted to go pawn d5 here, he could now do this. And this is why it's not the best move. That knight's left the attack on the e5 pawn. Now white could capture, the pawn recaptures. Yes, you're losing on e5. If white wanted to take, you don't have to do this. But then the d3 pawn is weak. So after the rook takes, the knight can hop in on d3, and there's also attacking ideas of bringing the queen out and also lifting this rook into the game. Then it could swing along this rank, which has just opened. So d5 would have been a nice break, but Nepo didn't play this one. Instead, he carried on manoeuvring, and Alireza now just has a little bit of pressure. So he went queen to f6. And knight h2 from Alireza, so all of his play now is centred around this g3 push, but first he wants to shore up his position, improve the pieces. So king h8 played, the queen came to f1 here, rook f7 prepared to double, and now this knight came over to f3, that's why Alireza moved the other one. The rook came to f8, and now g3 was played. Kicks this knight back. The rook came to the d-file, useful square later on. Queen e7, Nepo can only shuffle. King g2 from Alireza, queen e8, and now the rook came to d2, more waiting on the position, really mature play from Alireza, and here actually Nepo missteps. So Alireza said that he felt that best here was knight to f6, critically leaving this knight on c6. Because now when white goes d4, which you ultimately have to play if you want to make progress, black can capture, the pawn recaptures, but now the knight finds a square on b4. It's more active on that square, and if white ever goes e5, well then one of the knights can land here. You know, this is a decent position for black, hasn't got problems. So that would have been better, but Nepo didn't go knight f6 here. He went knight to e7, and this isn't quite the right manoeuvre. So Alireza goes queen d1, just improving that queen. The knight came to g6, And now Alireza pushes d4, but I just want to show you why there's no tactics working on the queen against this undefended knight. You might think you can say take here, after knight recaptures, okay great, I'm picking up your knight for free, I've won a pawn, but then there's this rook takes on f2 with check, your queen's undefended, black's winning your queen. That's the problem with that one. Equally, if you go knight to g5, same kind of idea, same kind of tricks, well you have to watch out for this knight f4 stuff. That's check against the king, say you capture with the pawn, knight recaptures with check, king moves, you pick up the knight. So those tactics aren't quite working. You have to be careful with black's tricky knights around your king. Instead, Alireza correctly played pawn to d4 here. And now you have to capture that one. You can't let white take on e5, leave you with those double isolated pawns. So the pawn recaptured here, and now knight f6 played, and queen c2 from Alireza. He starts probing now on the position. He's preparing rook c3, pressuring this backwards pawn here. And now this move's interesting. So Nepo could sit here now and play, say, rook e7, carry on shuffling. You know, that's what the computer wants here. But he's been sitting there all game. Alireza's been the one with the pawn break available at any moment. So here he plays a pawn break. He wants to clarify the position at least. It's not easy to defend when you never know if your opponent's going to push e5 or d5. Lots more calculation to be done. So e5 played, Alireza captured, the pawn recaptured, and now this rook swung to c3, hits that pawn, it came to c6, but we can see Alireza's got pressure here. Nepo's got 3 pawn islands, but Alireza's only got the 2 pawn islands, and his heavy pieces are better placed, which we see with this rook d6 invasion now. And here Alireza said, here I'm just better, this is very comfortable for me now. So after rook d6, rook d7 challenged the file, this one doubled on the file here, rook f to f7 supported the other rook, and now can you see the worst piece in the position for Alireza here? What's the one piece you want to improve? And this is the key to positional chess at times. Find your worst piece, improve it. And if you're enjoying this video, do let me know by hitting that like button and consider subscribing to the channel to never miss my Alireza games in the upcoming tournament. So here Alireza played knight to f1. Excellent move, bringing that one back into the game. It didn't really want to come to g4 here. And now Nepo took on d6, the rook recaptured. This one challenged the file, and now Alireza captured here, the queen recaptured, and he carried on improving this knight, but he didn't come to e3, which is interesting. So from e3, you can look at f5, also c4, but ultimately you want this knight on c4 because from there it attacks both of these weak pawns. That's actually the more active square than the f5 square in this position. But by bringing it to d2 here, yes, you can still come to c4, but you also hold this pawn and therefore it frees up the queen. So just nice positional play, very subtle stuff. Now this knight came to h5, and Nepo's really clutching at straws here. So he's setting up a bit of a cheapo. Say you go knight c4 now, well then this one jumps in with check. After the pawn captures, knight takes with check, king g1, the queen hops in. Now mate is threatened here, so you'd have to stop it like this, but then black can force a perpetual. This is just a draw. So you always have to keep your wits about you, of course. After knight to h5, Alireza just went king h2, and now none of this stuff is working. You can drop this knight back to g1, cover h3, there's no checks being landed against the king. So Nepo meekly returned to this f6 square. Alireza came to c3, again probing against these pawns. We had queen c7 defending, and now a really mature move from Alireza. He doesn't rush the position, just king to g2, letting Nepo stew, and Nepo makes a strategic mistake here. So he pushes pawn to c5, but look at the light squares in the position now. b5, d5, f5, a really ugly move. Now his idea is that he wants to bring this knight round to d4, but he's just not in time. So queen d3 was now played, holding this pawn, preparing knight c4, knight e7, knight to c4, and now knight to c6, preparing to land on d4, but bang, queen d6 from Alireza. he comes in on that file, invades in the position before the knight hits d4, and this is just a killing move. Because if you capture that queen, the knight recaptures hitting b7, say you go b6, well then we're going knight d2. The other knight spinning round into c4, say knight d7, holding e5, holding b6, well knight c4, and now the knights are just paralysed, holding pawns. Say you go knight d4, well the problem is there's knight f7 check, then you pick up this pawn. So say king g8, well now knight c8. This one's hit twice, it can't advance, winning position for white. So trading the queens was just no good. The pawns are terminally weak. Nepo saw this, so he tried queen d7, a trickier move, looking at this a4 pawn, but a great response from Alireza. He chops on e5 with the knight here. Now there's some tactics going on, because if black now takes the queen, you can't simply just recapture with your knight, then this knight is dropping off, you're a piece down. But the trick here is that you go knight to f7 check, then the king moves, you pick up the queen, you're doing good, you're a pawn up. So that's the trick. That's why Nepo didn't capture the queen. Instead he took here, Alireza took back with the queen. Now Nepo picks up on a4, but Alireza takes on c5. So he is a pawn ahead, and this e-pawn is really dangerous now. But queen c2 from Nepo, a good move, pinning the knight to the queen, looking at this pawn with knight and queen. So it advanced to e5, and now you want to hop this knight into e4, start threatening things around the king, but the problem is your own king. It's just terminally weak, there's checks coming here. Whatever you do here really, moving the king, pushing g6, there's just too many problems with this knight coming to d6, the pawn advancing, etc. It's no good for black. So Nepo had to come knight g8, cover his king, but now queen d5. A beautiful centralizing move, hits this pawn, covers the diagonal, whoops, misfire, and also breaks the pin here of the queen. So Nepo now went queen b3, renewing the pin, preparing b5, but classy move from Alireza, he goes pawn e6. Because yes, Nepo gets b5, but he's got it all worked out, he's so tactically astute as we know. You don't now go knight to e3, which might look logical, thinking, okay, you trade, I take back, etc. But black can take here is the problem. And even if you give knight for pawn in just a moment, black's now got two connected passes. This is anyone's guess who's winning. It's very, very tactical, not obvious at all. So knight e3 wasn't played. Alireza went queen a8. Excellent move, because now if black takes on c4, e7 is just killing. The knight is pinned, of course, can't take the pawn. This one's going through, and once again, the queen is on a brilliant diagonal, covering the king from checks. So after this move of queen a8, we had king to h7, breaking the pin, queen e4 check, king h8. The knight now took on a5, it hits the queen, and here Nepo's just paralysed. So he takes on b2, but now pawn e7, he's forced to give up the knight, the queen recaptured. Yes, he gets b4, but this one's going nowhere. So check from Alireza, king h7, queen e4, king h8, queen d5. Beautiful centralization once again, covers b3, queen a3 was played, hits the knight, hopped into b3 here, and we had just a few more moves before Nepo decided, right, I'm throwing in the towel. This was the final position. Alireza will soon round up this pawn, then he's a knight and a pawn ahead. Beautiful classical game from Alireza. I'm really excited to see these two play at the upcoming tournament. If you enjoyed this video, then click here to see another classic game between these two players. Thanks for watching, see you soon.